So today, I'm going to be chatting on productizing and monetizing APIs. But a little bit about myself. I'm the CEO of Moesif for the leading analytics and monetization platform. You can find me in San Francisco. If you ever love some IPAs, you can find me over at Zeitgeist. Saw a lot of different IPAs here at Austin, so great to be here. I guess that's not working. All right, so why are we talking about productizing and monetizing APIs? We saw what we heard from Bill earlier today. There's this huge shift in how we're actually selling and purchasing different software applications. What happened 10 years ago, a lot of these different business workflows were done through manual tasks. You log into a SaaS application, do some different things through a UI, and a lot of times that particular application was a full monolithic app rolled out across entire business unit or entire company. Today, an individual developer can do a lot of things through automation, through AI, they're doing things through ChatGPT, through APIs and the like. And so they're going after very specific and targeted use cases. So instead of doing this massive rollout at the entire company, it's one single use case. And so that's actually changing the way that developers and businesses are purchasing software. In 2004, if you're going to purchase something that's on-prem, you're probably going to figure out how do I actually deploy this and figure out a 6-month or maybe year-long POC or pilot just to see if it's going to fit my use case. Fast forward to 2014, now you can purchase a SaaS. You don't have to deal with the DevOps. You don't have to deal with the infrastructure. You just go purchase HubSpot or Atlassian or whatever it is that you're going to buy. And it's very simple for a single team to purchase and use software versus relying on what the entire organization is using. Now fast forward to 2024, a single developer can pick and choose what different APIs they want to use. They're trying to set up a search application or search bar inside their app, where they're going to go look at a couple of different APIs, Algolia being one, and a single developer can roll that out in a couple of weeks and get it up and running. So we're going to walk through a couple of different things today. First, we're going to talk about the business strategy. If you're actually selling your API for revenue, if you're trying to generate revenue from these APIs, how do you figure out the right pricing model and business strategy around it? Then we're going to talk a little bit around how do you grow and expand that strategy, what are the right metrics and KPIs to be looking at, and lastly, what do you do at the end? How do you grow? How do you iterate? How do you figure out when to actually deprecate the APIs? Let's just first talk about the business strategy itself. We're going to talk through 4 different things here. First, what do you actually charge for? What's the right metric to be charging your customers on? Then do you do prepaid versus postpaid billing? You can figure out different invoicing strategies. How do you actually decide when to invoice a customer? These are all different things that are going to be dependent on your industry, the market segment that you're going after in terms of your company. But throughout this presentation, one thing I want to be very careful about is making sure that our pricing strategy is aligned to customer value. Note in this chart I have right here, I don't have requests per second. We love, as engineers, talk about requests per second, latency, 90th percentiles, all of that type of stuff. But as a customer, I don't care if it's 1,000 requests per second or 100 requests per second. And so these are all different billable metrics for different industries. So if you're SMS or in the telco space, you might charge on number of text messages being sent through the platform. Maybe it's number of voice minutes being processed. In the classic example, Stripe, it's a revenue share model. So they famously charge 2.9% of every transaction. You can apply the same model in a lot of these expense reporting and other procurement-like software where it's actually a percentage of the spend through Brex or Expensify or whatever. If you're going after infrastructure teams, it might be based off of data volume, log lines, and the like. For customer-facing tools, things that are more tied to your CRM or your analytics stack, you might look at things like monthly unique users, monthly tracked users, and lastly, for different resource-based things like Amazon, it might be in terms of compute hours or number of resources that you're using. But let's talk about packaging strategy for a second. And there's 2 different ways you can actually set up your packaging yourself. There's tiered. Did I skip one? Let's go back to billing strategy first. There's 2 different billing strategies you can look at here. So one is your prepaid billing model. This is when you're purchasing your burner phone, you buy $100 worth of credits, and then you burn those down over the course of a month, year, or whatever it is. And you have your postpaid model. This is when you're signing up for AT&T, a Verizon bill, And at the end of the month, you get some bill. You don't know what it is. Is it $50 a month, $100 a month, it is whatever you spend at the end of that billing period. Now, there's a nice benefit for the prepaid billing model, which you have cash flow for the business. This is really important if you have very high infrastructure costs. So a lot of these AI-based applications, we're seeing the prepaid billing model work really well because they don't have to worry about how much it's going to cost for the NVIDIA cluster or something in Amazon. They're getting that cash up front. So for early stage startups or new businesses that you're creating, this might be a great way to bootstrap that business without worrying about how many customers you're going to have at the very beginning. It's also more familiar with the traditional SaaS contracts that we've seen. You buy a SaaS contract and it's for the year up front. But there's a big negative when you come to prepaid billing. And that's a friction that you see during the onboarding process. Because if I'm getting started with a new API, I don't know how much I'm going to use. Is it $100 worth or is it $10,000 worth? I really don't know. And so you're going to have a lot more of that friction during the onboarding process itself. And that's where the postpaid can actually be quite handy. Because in that case, you're taking the guesswork out of the onboarding experience, getting that developer up and running ASAP just to get them using your platform, right? It can also make pay-as-you-go a lot easier. Because in this case, you don't have to deal with how much should they actually be purchasing and dealing with credits and the like. You can just send them a bill at the end of the month. You know, when you look at how you purchase Google Cloud or AWS, you can sign up, you start spinning up a couple of servers, and then at the end of the month, you get a bill and you pay it. But there's a big con here, which is the credit risk. And so this goes back to if you have very high COGS or very high costs to deal with, then you're actually extending credit to your customers, which could be a risk, especially if it's very expensive. So the next thing we like to talk about is packaging strategy. And again, there's two different ways you can go about with your packaging of your APIs. There's a classical tiered base, which is your good, better, and best plan. And you have pay-as-you-go, which is what we usually call consumption-based or usage-based billing models. When you look at tiered pricing, the nice thing here is it actually enforces minimum spend. This is really important, especially if you have very high support costs. How do you manage 10,000 or 1 million different developers if they're paying a very, very small amount for your APIs? It's also really easy to implement. You can just have a very fixed $50, $100, $10,000, whatever that spectrum is, it's super easy to roll out. There's a huge problem when it comes to tiered pricing, which is it's not really aligned to customer value. In fact, if I'm a developer and I sign up for a piece of SaaS software, and I see that I'm going to get $200 worth of perceived value out of this platform, but let's say it costs $100, then the delta is $100. Now, I'm leaving money on the table because I'm not paying $200, I'm only paying $100. But let's say the next tier is actually $500. Now, what's happening is I'm stuck between these two tiers. I'm not ready to upgrade to the $500 tier, but I'm actually at least see $200 worth of value. And that's where these pay-as-you-go like models can work really well because you're aligning your revenue to the value that customer gets along with whatever your cost is. So you can actually plot that out as a nice linear or maybe exponential curve depending on how you set up your pricing model. So become a lot more efficient for your customers. It can make your platform appear cheaper. However, you have to be very careful about billing surprises. Because when you have a pay-as-you-go model, now what happens is you're taking out some of that visibility into how much you're actually paying. No developer wants to sign up for a service, expect they're paying $100. Now they have to go justify why they got a $10,000 bill on a credit card. No one wants to explain that to their manager. And so it can be also very complex to instrument. You need a lot of different processes to make sure you don't have these type of billing surprises. The last thing is when we look at things like invoicing. And this is more of an accounting concern versus the product concern. But there are two different ways to invoice customers. One is on a recurring schedule, send it out each month, each year, each quarter, some type of recurring pattern. It's super easy from an accounting standpoint, revenue recognition, all that type of stuff is built in. There's already a period there. But it can have very bad unit economics. You know, what if I actually purchase an API, only use 3 cents worth? Are you going to actually send me an invoice for the 3 cents worth for that month? And that's where these threshold-based billing models can actually work really well, especially for low unit APIs. In this case, you're reducing the transaction overhead. You make it much easier for the customer to roll up all of those transactions into one invoice. And that threshold can be defined at maybe it's $500, maybe it's 10,000, whatever it is. This was made very popular within the advertising industry. You just sign up, And then after you spend a certain amount of advertising budget, you get an invoice. However, it could be actually much more difficult to implement because now you have to figure out, well, when you purchase these credits, which billing period was that part of? So there's these things like revenue recognition that we all have to handle. So I talked a lot about just some of the different pricing models around APIs, especially if you're generating revenue through them. But let's talk about how do you actually grow and expand these APIs. And the thing to keep in mind is developers have a lot of different changing priorities, and they need buy-in from a lot of different people. We like to say we're marketing to developers. There's a lot of people behind those developers that they have to listen to. There's legal and security they have to think about, procurement, project priorities, finance, and the like. And so how do we make sure a developer can get up and running without dealing with all these different pieces? One of the fastest ways you can do this is try and make it self-service. Make it easy for them to get up and running, maybe not going live, but at least they're able to get up with a trial or a simple plan by doing things like click-through terms of service, having a very simple integration, so connecting with different tools that they're already using or different SDKs, so they don't have to actually plan out a long pilot or POC. And they can put things on a manager's credit card so they don't have to wait for procurement to finish with their review. Now, of course, it doesn't end there. So your goal here is really just landing lots of developers. And you're trying to increase your top of funnel here, right? So have lots of developers come through your platform and get them to paying as quick as possible, even if it's a token amount. It might be only $50, but at least they're paying for your API at this point. But then your job doesn't end there. What you're really trying to do is sell through these developers. You can have a lot of developers on your various self-service plans or maybe on your various trials that you have, and you're trying to figure out what is a way to grow this into a much larger customer. And that might mean identifying new use cases, expanding their usage. They might have certain requirements. They're in the healthcare space. They have HIPAA compliance they have to think about. A lot of different things to actually try and figure out from a sales-led perspective. And so what I'd like to split this between is two different pieces here. The first part here, which is the orange piece, that's your PLG motion, right? That's your self-service developer signing up. They're getting to that very first hello world, making that very first API call, and they start increasing their usage. They're showing this to their internal teams. They're maybe showing this to external users, getting feedback, iterating on that. They already saw some value in your API. And then what happens is that usage starts increasing further. And sales is going to identify those different customers where they're getting ready to release this to production. And how do you now have the right discussions to figure out what are the right requirements that they have that they need to solve for before this can actually go live, right? And so what we see here is one developer using one API, sales engages, that usage increases, but then we start identifying new use cases. Maybe this is a telco API and they're using the SMS API functionality only, and that was it. But by getting on a call, now we can figure out, well, there's a voice API that might solve some other use cases they have. There might be a video API that might solve some other use cases. You get those customers on board with the other APIs that you have, and those APIs also now start increasing their usage. And that's really what starts driving this PLG sales flywheel motion. But of course, scaling self-service is hard, right? You're gonna have all these different developers, many different issues during onboarding. They're gonna have different changing business needs. They're gonna have to start inviting other teams to start using or administrating the portal that you have. And so how do you actually manage that when you're trying to drive this bottoms-up or PLG motion that I'm showing here? And one of the fastest ways to do that is make it as self-service as possible. So instead of requiring them to ask you what their usage is or what their bill is going to look like, make it easy for them to find this information in their own way. So this goes back to what we saw earlier this morning of creating a really great developer experience, right? Make it super easy for them to find this type of information. And the other thing is over-communicate any type of change that might impact these developers and customers. So if they're getting close to a quota limit or their usage suddenly increased by 500% in a week, let them know about that. And you can do this through automated email. You can do this through a CS or account management-like strategy. It really depends on your industry, but at least over-communicating these type of changes to those folks will actually just make them sleep at night. No one wants to wake up 2 in the morning to a PagerDuty alert because of some rate limit issue. That's the worst thing you can do to developers. So lastly, how do you measure some of these KPIs that I'm mentioning? And one thing to keep in mind is there's plenty of infrastructure metrics. You know, you can be measuring the requests per second, the SLAs, all of that type of stuff. But me as a product manager, I shouldn't really be trying to drive the requests per second. And the reason being is I'd rather have my customers using batch endpoints, trying to implement my solution in the most efficient way versus just using the incorrect APIs. For example, if 80% of those API calls are health probes and status checks and stuff, is that really business value? Or is that just a bunch of extra stuff because of a poor implementation? And so there's lots of infrastructure metrics, but what we should really be looking at is linking these KPIs and metrics to the product goals. And each quarter, these product goals might change. The first quarter you launch, you might be focused on adoption. And the next quarter, it might be driving up engagement. And then once you have a large customer base, your strategy might shift towards retention itself. So adoption, we like to talk about our time to first hello world and time to working app. These are two popular metrics to be looking at. Time to first hello world is the time to very first API call through a tool like Postman, Core, whatever it is. But that doesn't necessarily mean they actually have a full solution they can show to users, the manager, and the like. And that's where we get to working app. And that might mean sending over 100 API calls, 100 text messages, whatever it is. Engagement, again, we're looking at things that are specific to what the customer gets out of the API versus just requests per second. So if you're an e-commerce platform, it might mean things like checkout conversion rate. If you're a data API, how many matches were successful? What is the match rate like? Because you don't want a customer sign up, they're expecting to get all this data out of your data API, but every single time they query, empty results. They're not really getting much value there. Lastly, when we look at things like retention, you can plot this out on a retention curve. So what I'm showing here is product retention segmented by two different segments here. The first is enterprise, which is the red, and the yellow is self-service, which is the lighter color there. And you notice at week 0, everyone's at 100%. Great, everyone signed up. They should be engaged the first week. But then slowly over time, it drops, and then it levels out. And this is actually a good retention curve because it does level out. By the time you get to, was it like week 8 or week 9, we're still around 30 to 40% at least, right? So we still have a good customer base active. If these retention curves went down to 0, that means I have a leaky boat. It doesn't even make sense for me to keep driving developer adoption and getting more users to use my APIs if they're just leaving. That means they're not solving their use case, and they might be struggling because of documentation issues, integration issues. There'd be a lot of different things that we have to solve before we try and push on adoption further. And the life. Lastly, one takeaway here is don't break their stuff. If you're going to deprecate something, make sure you let them know. Have a plan for them to succeed with the next API, and let them know ahead of time, 6 months, a year even. So they're not, again, waking up and trying to scramble to put something together. Lastly, my one quick plug here, if you're looking to monetize APIs, we have integration with lots of different API gateway vendors, a lot of them here. Always happy to answer any questions around this. Thank you very much.